Look at this map. This is the M10 highway, the main artery connecting Moscow to St. Petersburg. It cuts through the Valdai region, which is not some random stretch of Russian countryside. Valdai is dense forest, rolling hills, and in late December, it is frozen wilderness. The nearest significant population center is Valdai town itself, population 16,000. This highway is critical infrastructure. It is patrolled, it is monitored, and at 0347 Moscow time this morning, a convoy traveling on this specific section of the M10, just north of Valdai, was destroyed. I want to be very clear about what we are dealing with. This was not a single vehicle incident. This was a multi-vehicle armored convoy. The kind of convoy that does not move through Russia without advance clearance, route security, and air cover. The kind of convoy that carries someone who matters. And according to multiple intelligence sources I have been reviewing since 4 a.m. Eastern Time, that convoy was carrying Vladimir Putin. And he survived the explosion, but his vehicle did not. And now he is on foot in the Valdai forest, and they are hunting him with thermal cameras. Let me show you what that means. If you zoom in on the section of the M10 where this happened, you will see that the forest on both sides of the highway is not light tree cover. This is Valdai National Park, adjacent territory. This is thick, old-growth Russian forest, pine, spruce, birch. In December, the temperature at night in this region drops to -10, -15 Celsius. That is 14 degrees Fahrenheit. That is cold enough to kill an unprepared person in hours. And if Putin fled the convoy on foot after the explosion, he went into that forest in whatever clothes he was wearing at the time, with whatever supplies were immediately accessible, in the middle of the night. And now I want you to think about what happens next, because this is where the technical details become critical. The Russian Federal Protective Service, the FSO, which is responsible for presidential security, does not respond to a situation like this with a search party holding flashlights. They deploy military-grade thermal imaging systems. These are not the handheld devices you see on hunting shows. These are helicopter-mounted FLIR systems. Forward-looking infrared, the same technology used by U.S. military forces for tracking targets in Afghanistan and Iraq. These systems detect body heat through forest canopy. They can identify a human-sized heat signature from 3,000 feet in the air. And in sub-zero conditions, a warm human body stands out like a flare. If you are following me for updates on this developing situation, you need to understand that this is not a rescue operation. This is a manhunt. Because the question is not whether they can find him. The question is who is looking for him. And I am going to break down exactly why that distinction matters in a moment, but you need to be following right now because the information coming out of Russia is changing every hour, and you cannot afford to miss what happens next. Let me walk you through the timeline. 0347, the convoy is hit. Let us assume Putin exits the vehicle and moves into the forest within minutes. By 0400, he is in dense tree cover. The FSO would have had helicopters in the air by 0430. That is standard rapid response protocol. That means thermal imaging sweeps began within 45 minutes of the attack. And here is what thermal imaging reveals in a forest environment. Roads, clearings, bodies of water show up as cold zones, dark blue or black, on the thermal display. Trees show up as slightly warmer because they retain some daytime heat, but not much. And a human body, especially a body that has been moving, running, generating heat, shows up as bright white or red. You cannot hide from it. If you are in the forest and a helicopter with FLIR is overhead, you are visible. But there is a tactical problem. Valdai Forest is not open terrain. It is not a desert where you can spot a single heat signature and vector in. The forest canopy in this region is thick enough that thermal imaging has limitations. You get partial occlusion, you get false positives from wildlife, deer, wild boar, which are common in this area. And if the target is moving, you are tracking a moving signature through interrupted coverage. That is why they would deploy ground units with tracking dogs. German Shepherds, Malinois, the same breeds used by military and law enforcement globally for tracking. These dogs can follow a scent trail through snow, through water, through terrain that breaks visual line of sight. And if Putin has been on foot for hours, he has left a scent trail. Now, I want you to think about the historical precedent here, because this is not the first time a national leader has fled on foot and been hunted. December 22nd, 1989. Nicolae Ceausescu, the dictator of Romania, flees Bucharest by helicopter as the revolution closes in. The helicopter lands in a field. Ceausescu and his wife Elena attempt to escape on foot and by car. They are captured within hours by military units that have turned against them. They are executed by firing squad 3 days later on Christmas Day. The entire sequence from flight to execution is 72 hours. October 20th, 2011. Muammar Gaddafi flees Sirte, Libya, in a convoy that is struck by NATO airstrikes and rebel forces. Gaddafi escapes the vehicles and attempts to hide in a drainage culvert. He is found, dragged out, and killed by rebel fighters within minutes. The video of his capture is broadcast globally. Both of those men believed they could escape. Both of those men had security forces, loyalists, resources, and both of them died in the dirt because when the collapse happens, it happens fast. And what we are watching right now in the Valdai forest is that same collapse in real time. Here's what I need you to understand. If the FSO is running this operation, if the thermal cameras and the helicopters and the tracking dogs are under FSO command, then this is a rescue operation. The FSO's job is to protect the president. Their mission is to extract him, secure him, and restore command authority. But if this operation has been taken over by military units, if the helicopters overhead are not FSO but Russian aerospace forces, if the ground units moving through the forest are Spetsnaz or regular army, then this is not a rescue. This is a hunt. And I want you to tell me in the comments what you think is happening here, because the intelligence I am looking at does not give me a clear answer. The FSO is part of the security apparatus that reports directly to the president, but the military is a separate chain of command. And if there has been a break between those two structures, if the military has decided that Putin is no longer the legitimate commander-in-chief, then the people searching that forest are not looking to save him. They are looking to capture him or eliminate him. Let me show you why the Valdai location matters strategically. Valdai is roughly 400 kilometers, 250 miles northwest of Moscow. It is on the route to St. Petersburg. If Putin was traveling from Moscow to St. Petersburg, which is plausible given that St. Petersburg is his hometown, that is a logical route. But here is what is critical. Valdai is also remote. It is not a major city. It is not a military base. It is forest, small towns, lakes. If you were planning to stage an attack on a presidential convoy, Valdai is a tactically smart location because you have natural cover for the attackers, limited response infrastructure, and escape routes into wilderness. But here is the other side of that equation. If you are the president of Russia and your convoy is hit and you survive, fleeing into the Valdai forest is not a plan. It is desperation. Because the forest does not offer you extraction. It does not offer you communication. It does not offer you security. It offers you hypothermia and isolation. Which tells me that whatever happened on that highway, Putin did not have a backup plan. He ran because it was the only option in that moment. And now he is in the worst possible tactical position, alone, on foot, in hostile terrain, with no secure communication, no support, and no clear extraction route. And you need to be following this account because I am going to have thermal imaging analysis and updated intelligence on this situation as it develops. And if you are not following, you are going to miss the moment when we find out whether the FSO secures him or whether the military brings him in. This is not a story that is going to wait for the evening news cycle. This is happening now. Let me break down the technical capabilities that are in play. Modern military thermal imaging operates in two wavelength bands, mid-wave infrared and long-wave infrared. Mid-wave, 3 to 5 micrometers, is better for daytime and detecting heat signatures against warm backgrounds. Long-wave, 8 to 12 micrometers, is better for nighttime and cold environments because it picks up the thermal contrast between a warm body and a cold environment more effectively. In the Valdai forest at night in December, long-wave infrared is the primary tool. And the systems that the Russian military has available include the Spetsnaz, which is a helicopter-mounted thermal imaging suite used by Russian aerospace forces, and the Shmel, a portable thermal imager used by ground forces. The Spetsnaz has a detection range of approximately 5 kilometers under optimal conditions, that is 3 miles. But in forest conditions with canopy interference, that effective range drops significantly, maybe to 1 or 2 kilometers. The system uses automatic target tracking, which means once a heat signature is identified, the system locks onto it and tracks movement. If Putin is moving through the forest, and if a helicopter with Sapsan M has acquired his heat signature, they know where he is in real time. The Shmel, the portable unit, is used by ground units for close-range tracking. Detection range is about 1 kilometer, maybe 1,500 meters in open terrain, less in forest. But the advantage of the Shmel is that ground units can move through the forest with it, scanning systematically. And once they are close, the Shmel gives them exact location data. Combine that with tracking dogs, and you have a grid search pattern that is very hard to evade. And here's the thing about tracking dogs that people do not always understand. A trained tracking dog does not just follow the freshest scent. It follows the specific scent profile of the target. If they have an article of clothing, a seat from the vehicle, anything that carries Putin's scent, they give that to the dog, and the dog follows that specific trail. In snow, that trail is even easier to follow because the scent particles get trapped in the snow and released slowly, which gives the dog a consistent track. And in cold conditions, scent does not dissipate as quickly as it does in heat. The trail stays viable for longer. Now let me connect this to the larger strategic picture, because this is not just about one man in the forest. This is about nuclear command authority. Russia's nuclear arsenal is the largest in the world. Approximately 6,000 warheads, 1,600 of those deployed on active delivery systems. The command structure for those weapons is called Kazbek, named after Mount Kazbek. It is sometimes referred to as the nuclear briefcase, but it is actually a secure communication system. The president has a Chejit terminal. The Minister of Defense has one. The Chief of the General Staff has one. All three must authenticate in order to authorize a nuclear launch. If Putin is in the Valdai forest with no secure communication, he does not have access to the Chejit system, which means he cannot authorize a nuclear launch, but it also means he cannot prevent one. If the Minister of Defense and the Chief of the General Staff decide to act without him, they have 2 of the 3 authentication points. And under Russian nuclear doctrine, there are scenarios where a launch can be authorized without presidential input if the command structure believes the president is incapacitated or unreachable. And that is the nightmare scenario. Not that Putin launches a nuclear strike from the forest. That is not possible. The nightmare is that with Putin unreachable, the military leadership makes a decision about nuclear posture without him. Maybe they put forces on high alert. Maybe they move tactical nuclear weapons. Maybe they decide that the instability created by a presidential manhunt requires a show of strength to deter Western intervention, and NATO is watching this. U.S. Strategic Command is watching this. And the risk of miscalculation goes through the roof. Let me show you what NATO can see. The United States operates the Sentinel satellite constellation for infrared detection of missile launches, but those satellites also have secondary capabilities for detecting large heat sources on the ground. If there are helicopters operating in the Valdai region with active thermal imaging systems, if there are ground vehicles, if there are concentrations of heat that indicate a large-scale operation, U.S. satellites can detect that. They cannot see individual people in the forest, but they can see the operational footprint of a manhunt. European satellites, including the Copernicus Sentinel network operated by the European Space Agency, provide optical and radar imaging. Radar imaging is particularly useful because it penetrates cloud cover and operates at night. If there is unusual military activity in the Valdai region, if there are vehicle convoys, helicopter deployments, anything that disrupts normal patterns, Sentinel radar can detect it. And that data is shared with NATO intelligence. Which means NATO knows something is happening. They may not know the exact details. They may not know that Putin is on foot in the forest. But they know there is a large-scale operation underway in a region of Russia that does not normally see that kind of activity. And they are making assessments about what that means for stability, for nuclear command, for the risk of escalation. And I need to ask you, does this look like a secure transition of power? Does this look like a government that is in control? Because to me, this looks like chaos. And chaos in a nuclear state is the most dangerous thing in the world. Tell me in the comments if you think NATO is preparing a response, because I want to know what you are seeing in this. Let me give you another historical comparison. In July 1994, North Korean leader Kim Il-sung dies suddenly. There is a period of uncertainty about who is in control. The U.S. military goes to heightened alert because North Korea is a nuclear state, or at least a near-nuclear state at that time. And the fear is that instability could lead to a military provocation or a miscalculation. The crisis passes without incident, but the alert status remains elevated for weeks. That is the standard response when a nuclear state experiences leadership instability, heightened readiness, increased surveillance, preparation for contingencies. If NATO assesses that Putin is not in effective command, that there is a power vacuum or a contested transition, the response is similar. SAN European forces go to higher readiness states. Nuclear forces, particularly the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarines that patrol the Atlantic and the Pacific, increase their alert status. Strategic bombers, the B-52 seconds and B-2 seconds, may go to higher readiness or even airborne alert. Not because NATO is planning an attack, but because the doctrine requires readiness in case Russia makes an unpredictable move. And that creates a feedback loop. Russia sees NATO forces increasing readiness. Russian military leadership, already in crisis mode, interprets that as a potential threat. They increase their own readiness. And suddenly you have two nuclear-armed alliances in heightened postures, watching each other, and the risk of an accidental escalation. A misinterpreted signal, a radar glitch that gets treated as real, that risk goes up exponentially. Now let me take you back to the forest, because the clock is ticking. If Putin has been on foot since 0347, and it is now midday Moscow time, he has been in the forest for 8-9 hours. In -10 Celsius conditions, without proper cold weather gear, that is approaching the limit of survivability. Hypothermia stages progress from mild, where you have shivering and impaired judgment, to moderate, where shivering stops and confusion sets in, to severe, where you lose consciousness. 9 hours in those conditions, even if you are moving and generating body heat, you are in moderate hypothermia territory. Your cognitive function is impaired, your decision-making is compromised, you are not thinking clearly. And if thermal imaging has been tracking him for hours, the helicopters overhead have his position. The ground units are closing in, the dogs have the scent. This is not an escape, this is a countdown. And here is what I keep coming back to. Why was Putin in a convoy on the M10 highway at 3:47 in the morning? That is not normal movement protocol for a head of state. Presidential travel in Russia is planned, secured, and does not happen in the middle of the night unless there is an emergency, which means either Putin was responding to a crisis or he was fleeing from one. And the fact that the convoy was hit suggests someone knew he would be on that road at that time. That is not a random ambush. That is actionable intelligence, which means someone inside the security structure gave up his location. And if someone inside gave up his location, then the FSO is compromised. And if the FSO is compromised, then Putin has no secure protection force. And if he has no secure protection force, then extraction is not possible. Because who does he call? Who does he trust? And that is why this manhunt is existential. Not just because Putin is physically in danger, but because the entire command structure that keeps him in power has collapsed. And when that happens, history tells us the end comes fast. Let me give you the Gaddafi timeline again, because it is instructive. October 20th, 2011, 0830 local time, Gaddafi's convoy leaves Sirte, attempting to break through rebel lines. 0835, NATO aircraft strike the convoy. Gaddafi survives and hides in a drainage pipe. By 0900, he is captured. By 0930, he is dead. The entire sequence from escape attempt to death is 1 hour. Ceausescu, December 22nd, 1989. Flees Bucharest at 1200, captured by 1800, executed 72 hours later. From the moment of flight, the clock is ticking, and it does not stop. And right now, in the Valdai forest, that clock is ticking for Putin, and you need to be following this account because when the resolution comes, and it will come, you need to see the analysis in real time. Make sure you are following so you get the notification the moment I have an update, because this situation is not going to stay frozen. It is moving. Let me talk about the forest itself, because terrain matters. Valdai National Park covers approximately 158,000 hectares. That is 610 square miles of protected forest, lakes, and wetlands. The region is known for Lake Valdai, Lake Seliger, multiple smaller lakes. In winter, those lakes are frozen. If Putin is attempting to cross frozen lakes to avoid detection or to put distance between himself and pursuers, that is tactically understandable, but also extremely dangerous. Ice thickness in December in this region is variable. Some areas have solid ice, some areas have thin ice over moving water. If you break through, you are in water that is 0 degrees Celsius, 32 Fahrenheit, and you have minutes before hypothermia incapacitates you. The forest terrain includes elevation changes, ravines, dense undergrowth. In winter, the undergrowth is dead or dormant, which actually makes movement easier than in summer, but it also means there is less concealment. Thermal imaging can see through dead brush more easily than through summer foliage, and snow cover creates tracks. Unless there is fresh snowfall covering the trail, every step leaves a visible print that ground units can follow. If I were advising Putin on evasion tactics, and I am not, but if I were, I would tell him the only chance is to find a structure, a building, a hunting cabin, something with walls that block thermal imaging, and wait for an extraction opportunity. But the problem is, any structure in that forest is going to be searched. And if the people searching are military, not FSO, then hiding in a structure is a trap. The other option is to move constantly, stay ahead of the search grid, and hope for exfiltration by a loyalist unit. But exfiltration requires communication, coordination, and trust. And if the FSO is compromised, who is he calling? And if he does not have secure communication, how does he coordinate an extraction? This is the tactical dead end. Every option leads to capture or death, and the only question is timing. Now let me address the international response, because this is not happening in a vacuum. If NATO intelligence confirms that Putin is the target of a manhunt, that he is not in command, that there is a power struggle inside Russia, the immediate concern is nuclear security. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, monitors nuclear materials and facilities. Russia has multiple nuclear power plants, research reactors, and weapons production facilities. If there is instability, the IAEA will seek confirmation that those facilities are secure, that there is no risk of a nuclear accident or a security breach. The United Nations Security Council, where Russia holds a permanent seat with veto power, becomes a flashpoint. If Russia's UN representative is acting on orders from a government that no longer includes Putin, or if there is confusion about who is giving orders, that creates a legitimacy crisis. Other Security Council members, particularly the US, the UK, and France, will demand clarity on who is in control. And if Russia cannot provide that clarity, the Security Council becomes paralyzed. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes Russia, China, India, and Central Asian states, will also respond. China, in particular, has a vested interest in Russian stability because instability in Russia affects energy supplies, trade routes, and regional security. If China assesses that Russia is in collapse, Beijing may position itself as a stabilizing force, offering mediation or support to whatever faction emerges as the new leadership. But that support comes with conditions, and those conditions reshape the balance of power in Eurasia. And all of these international responses, all of these strategic recalculations, they are happening right now, while Putin is in the Valdai forest, while helicopters are overhead, while dogs are tracking through the snow. The manhunt is not just a physical event. It is a geopolitical singularity, and the outcome determines the shape of the next decade. And I want to know what you think happens next. Do you think the FSO extracts him? Do you think the military captures him? Do you think he does not make it out of the forest? Tell me in the comments, because I am tracking this minute by minute, and your analysis helps me understand what different perspectives are seeing in this. Let me give you one more technical detail, because I think it matters. Thermal imaging has a weakness. If the target can reduce their heat signature, they become harder to detect. That means finding insulation, covering the body with materials that block infrared, or submerging in water briefly to lower skin temperature. In a survival scenario, if Putin has access to any kind of insulating material, blankets, tarps, even pine boughs piled on top of him, that reduces his thermal signature. Not eliminates, but reduces. It makes the helicopters work harder to maintain the track. But here's the thing. Doing that requires stopping. It requires finding materials. It requires time. And time is what he does not have. Because the search grid is tightening. The helicopters are flying overlapping patterns. The ground units are sweeping systematically. And unless he has already found a hide site with thermal shielding, unless he has already gone to ground, he is visible. And they know where he is. And that brings me to the final question. The question that determines everything. What happens when they find him? If the FSO finds him first, He gets extracted, he gets to a secure location, he reasserts command authority, and this becomes a story about a close call. But if the military finds him first, if the units on the ground are not FSO, then we are watching the end. And the end looks like Ceausescu in that courtyard in Tergovishte. It looks like Gaddafi in that ditch outside Sirte. It looks like a man who held absolute power, hunted down in the dirt, and the video broadcast to the world. And I need you to be following right now, because when that resolution comes, I am going to have the analysis, the context, the strategic implications, and you cannot afford to miss it. This is not a story that ends quietly. This is the kind of event that reshapes history, and you need to be here when it happens. Let me tie this back to the convoy explosion, because the details matter. An armored convoy does not get destroyed by a simple IED. The vehicles in a presidential convoy are hardened against explosives. They have reinforced armor, mine protection, blast-resistant design. To destroy a vehicle like that, you need a significant explosive charge, military grade, or you need a direct hit from an anti-tank weapon. Something like an RPG-7, or more likely, something heavier. An ATGM, an anti-tank guided missile. Systems like the Kornet, which is Russian-made, or the Javelin, which is U.S. made and supplied to Ukraine. If Ukrainian operatives or Russian dissident forces used an ATGM on that convoy, that is a military operation, not a terrorist attack, that is planned, coordinated, and executed with precision. And it means the attackers had advanced intelligence on the convoy route, timing, and security posture. That level of intelligence comes from inside. And if it comes from inside, then the security breach goes all the way to the top. And that is why this is not just a manhunt. This is a regime collapse. Because if Putin cannot trust his own security forces, if his convoy can be ambushed on a major highway, if he is running through the forest with no extraction plan, then the government is not functioning. And when the government is not functioning, someone else steps in, and the question is who? And you need to tell me what you are seeing, because I am looking at the data, I am looking at the satellite feeds, I am looking at the intelligence reports, and I need to know if I am reading this correctly. Comment below. Is this a coup? Is this an assassination attempt that failed and turned into a manhunt? Is this the FSO trying to secure him while rogue military units close in? What do you think is happening in that forest right now? Because here is what I know. The thermal cameras do not lie. If there is a heat signature in the Valdai forest that matches a human in distress that is being tracked by helicopters and ground units, that is a target being hunted. And the outcome of that hunt determines who controls Russia. And who controls Russia determines the future of nuclear deterrence, the war in Ukraine, the balance of power in Europe, and the stability of the global order. This is not a story. This is the story. And it is happening right now. And if you are not following this account for minute-by-minute updates, you are missing the most important geopolitical event of the decade. Make sure you follow, make sure you turn on notifications, because when the next update drops, when we find out what happened in that forest, you need to be here.